Here it comes. It's one way to do it. Now, in the previous installment of the Caddy RS series, we did a bunch of cosmetic upgrades to make the van look a bit more in keeping with this new powertrain. This ranged from fitting the wheels and seats out of a 2018 RS3, some upgraded tail lights, a lowering kit on the rear axle, and also an arch kit to just give it a bit more of a purposeful stance. The van does look a lot better now, but as expected with a project like this, it's nowhere near complete. So the plan for today is we're going to be doing a bunch of handling upgrades to tighten up this 500,000 mile chassis. But before we get started, I'd like to thank our long-time channel sponsors, Car Vertical. Now, if you're not already familiar with Car Vertical, essentially it's a website that allows you to obtain a full report on any car. All you've got to do is enter registration or the VIN. I've always made sure to use their services before picking up a new project car for the channel, whether it's a 335i from a couple of years ago or more recently the R36 Passat. Now, as always, I have got an example report to share with you guys just to demonstrate how all of this works, and in this case we're going to be taking a look at a Mark 6 GTI. Now, at the top here we've essentially been given a snapshot of the vehicle we've searched for. So in the case of this Mark 6 GTI, it's telling us that we've got no problems with any mileage fraud or it being stolen, but it has flagged up something on the financial and legal status, and it also mentions that it was previously damaged. First in February 2019, where it was a Category S write-off, and second in December 2020, where it was changed to a Category B. If we head over to the photos now in more detail, we can see that these were taken in 2019, so this is when it was registered as a Cat S. Mostly seems to be a front-end impact. Interior doesn't look too bad, but the airbags have gone off. Seems to be something weird there going on with the passenger side and the way that damage is like going into like the lower part of the quarter panel. Maybe that explains why later on this thing was changed to a Category B, which is a car that cannot be put back on the road. You can only break it for parts, as opposed to Category S, which is structural damage, but you can put it back on the road. Got a nice graph there as well, plotting the mileage over the years, indicating that there's no discrepancies. And in the financial and legal status section, it tells us whether or not the car's got any outstanding finance. In this case, it came up all clear. They gave the website a bit of an overhaul recently, so it's a lot easier to go through the various different sections and extract the information that you require. Now, I have got a little incentive for you folks. If you go and click the link in my description and then use the code TRH, what that'll do is to save you 10% off your next report. But yeah, big thanks to Car Vertical as always for their continued support of the channel. Let's crack on with this Caddy. Now, first on the agenda is brakes, and regular viewers will know that the van is technically already upgraded as it has the complete setup from the TTRS donor car. This consists of the very popular Brembo 4-pot calipers with a 370mm disc, and also the rears which run a 310mm vented disc. Trouble is, one, they're a bit past their expiry date and look a bit crusty, and two, they just don't quite fill out those lovely new RS3 blade wheels. So to remedy this, I've opted for the 356mm disc upgrade from the guys at Vagbrem Technic. You'll recall that we paid them a visit in an earlier episode to get some custom length brake lines made for the rear of the van. The kit consists of the disc itself, to which I opted for the cross drilled style so they match the OEM fronts, some machined adapters that attach onto the caliper bracket, these essentially space them out, and also a centering ring. It's been designed to work with most of the VW Group cars that run this 310mm rear setup, but yes, you guessed it, not so much on a TTRS 8J. This is because of an offset difference, which I unfortunately realized halfway into the job, so I had to quickly go grab these caliper brackets off eBay. Before the Mark 5 Golf R32 or S38P, and yes, I know they're not the genuine TRW item, but it'll do the job for now. This van isn't exactly racing anywhere just yet. The removal process is straightforward. There's two screws holding the caliper onto the bracket, and then there's two large bolts that go into the hub. Cool thing about Caddies, there's a place to put it on top of the leaf spring. Old crusty pads out. There we go. Then all that's left is a little torque screw which keeps the disc in place. Be careful with this one as it's very easy to round off. And of course the obligatory comparison, bit of a hilarious difference that, and that's off an RS product already. But yeah, the offset difference is very noticeable, isn't it? The TTRS one's a much taller disc, that's way shallower. We've also got the brackets side by side, which at initial glance you're probably thinking they look exactly the same, but that's ever so slightly more lower down. They are perfectly in line. Now, before installing the new discs, I made sure to give the mounting surface a good clean to get all the dirt and rust removed. There's also the centering ring that needs to go on as well, and then it's time to assemble the VBT adapters which attach onto the brackets with two Allen bolts. For the brake pads, I opted for some TRW branded ones as I thought they'd be the same as the factory ones. Unfortunately though, the supplied hardware wasn't quite up to the OEM TRW standard, as I found out when trying to bolt up the caliper bracket. Really minor thing, but it's also stopping us from going any further at this point, is these little pad clip things. They're too far inwards that they're not allowing us to go over the disc. They do fit a bit rubbish as well, so let me try something. Now, because we have this magnificent R36, there's another project on the channel which happens to also run 310 brakes on the rear. I already had some parts being accumulated for part 2, and one of those is the rear brake setup. Even got the part numbers and everything. Now I do have the original pads which I was checking before, so see it's TRW, but it's slightly different to the other TRW ones. But we have got some clips with them, so let's try this. Bit of a noticeable difference there with the genuine part, isn't it, folks? Even though this caliper is not the real deal, the bracket is a problem. Look at that, plenty of clearance, is perfectly in line. Even the attempt to use equivalent OEM parts, they're not quite OEM, are they? All good, my friends. Right, so that's all secure, looking very fancy, but I've had a bit of a change of mind with this caliper, which was the original TT one. Definitely needs a refurb, all the paint's all over the place, the boot's a bit torn. So what I'm going to do is fit this, which is a caliper that came as a full kit with this eBay bracket here. Let's get this lined up. Out. And there we have it, that's the passenger side all complete. Now before we continue with the video, I just wanted to drop a quick reminder. If you do enjoy the content on this channel, make sure you are subscribed. As I mentioned previously, I've set myself a target of 200k subs this year. I've got a bunch of content in the pipeline, so it'd be great to have you on board. After repeating the process on the driver's side, it was time to bleed the system, and for this I've always opted to use a pressure bleeder. The brake fluid of choice was some Motel RBF 600, but make sure to put in a fair bit, as I've had situations in the past where the bleeder actually introduced air into the braking system by simply being too empty. It goes straight onto the reservoir, and I normally pump it up to between 20 and 25 psi, and after leaving it for a short amount of time to see if the system holds pressure, it was time to start going around to each of the calipers and open up the bleed screw. This part's pretty self-explanatory. Right, so that's all of the braking related items for today's video, all done and dusted. I've just checked the pedal, it's got a nice strong feel to it. The silver does work pretty well, but we'll change it to black later on, in addition to also maybe sprucing up the front. They're not too bad, but the RS logo is a bit faded. Next, it was time to move on to some chassis upgrades, courtesy of our good friends at Whiteline. But before we get into specifics, here's yet another hardware recap, so we're all on the same page. So as part of the conversion, the full front assembly of the 8J RS donor car was transferred over. So that's the suspension, the aluminium hubs and arms, bushes, drop links, steering rack, and also the front anti-roll bar. The only exception was a subframe, which was off an RSQ3, and that was only because there was an issue with the TT-RS1 when we removed it, and not actually a fitment problem. I mean, all things said and done, it's already a big upgrade over the standard Caddy, but all of these bits are off a 2009 car with over 100,000 miles, so there's always room for a bit of improvement. So starting over on the left, we've got the Whiteline control arm kit. These are made out of aluminium, just like the factory TTRS and Passat arms, but these come with the poly bushes already pre-installed. Included also are the anti-lift rear bushes. Now, these are a great solution for reducing wheel hop, especially on the front wheel drive stuff. Moving along the table, we've got some fancy new ball joints, also known as the roll center correction kit, an upgraded dog bone, and also a pair of anti-roll bars. The one on the top is for like a Golf or an A3, and the one on the bottom is specifically designed for the Caddy 2K and its rear beam design. Along with that, we've also got some new drop links. Right, so we'll start on the rear anti-roll bar first, because it's the most simple thing on that table. We've got this beam in the middle, got the leaf spring on either side, and the bolts to the anti-roll bar right here. So you got the usual setup where there's two on each side. Obviously the bush is there in the middle, and then we've got the drop link, which attaches on one end there, and the other end is on the chassis. We can. These are 16 mils, anti-roll bar out. Okay, quick side-by-side comparison. The most noticeable thing for me is the adjustment here, for which I've gone for the middle setting. This doesn't look as narrow as you would expect, but I imagine the Maxi's probably got a slightly different setup to a normal Caddy anyway. But I have noticed that it's slightly curved. So I don't know if due to it doing 500,000 miles, that's happened with the different loads in the van, but this is perfectly straight. It goes around and straight onto there. There's not really much to mention in terms of the drop links. They're just standard but brand new. You can't get adjustable ones for the rear of a Caddy as far as I know. Let's just see what it's like in max attack mode. That gets into place like that. You can always adjust the settings whenever you feel like it. So if the van's too crazy, we'll soften it up, maybe try the middle. And if that doesn't work, we'll go with the softest setting. And there we have it, rear anti-roll bar installed. If I was going to give this a difficulty rating, it'd literally be like a 3 out of 10. It's not hard at all. Now moving swiftly over to the front of the van. Yes, folks, it's time to drop yet another subframe. This will probably feel like deja vu, because it's exactly what we did in R36 Resto Part 1. The only differences between the two is that the TTRS has these more solid looking rear bushes, and also these fancy cooling ducts for the brakes. Process of removal is identical as you would expect. You've got to undo the drop links from each strut. Then there's the 3 ball joint nuts on the control arms, the dog bone, which incidentally is brand new, and then you've got the usual 18mm bolts around the perimeter that go into the body. Make sure whilst you're doing this, you unbolt the steering rack from the subframe as well. There we are. Arms coming out. One way to do it. And down it goes. Yes, my transmission jack actually works now, so there's no more balancing things on a cardboard box. Now you may be sitting there thinking, hold on, that looked a bit too easy. Well, you're right, that's the beauty of editing. Unless it's a month-old Volkswagen, you're likely going to have to cut things off. And for me, it was one of the driver's side drop links, which had a rounded insert. It kept spinning, so I had to break out the Dremel. And then there was also the 2 nuts on the top of the ball joints that I had to cut off as well. The reason I did this is because I couldn't undo the 24mm drive shaft bolt. My basic impact just wasn't up to the task, and the breaker bar that I had felt like it was going to break itself. The stress doesn't end there though, because once the top nut was off, the separator fork that I usually use and you give it a few whacks with a hammer, it basically was doing nothing. So I had to wait another day for a special tool to arrive. I highly recommend you get one of these because it literally just turned it into a 5-second job, and it helps you avoid destroying your fancy aluminium hubs. That works very good. Naturally, the subframe was a mess and it had random debris in it, so a quick clean was in order. I'd say it came out pretty well considering all I used was a hose pipe and some brake cleaner. The first item I offered up was the anti-roll bar, which was swiftly declined because the thread didn't quite reach, so I couldn't tighten it down. It's almost like it needed a bigger washer in the kit, or it just wasn't the correct item. So I ended up reinstalling the TTRS one, which in all fairness is already a bit of an upgrade for the van, and it came out pretty well with a clean. Now the control arms fitted perfect, but a few taps with a mallet is always an option if they like to fight back. And in regards to those fancy roll center correction ball joints that I showed you earlier, this is where the adjustment comes from. It's a great option for a load vehicle as it allows for an extra ½ degree of negative camber if you choose to go down that route. The cool thing with these is when it's on the table, you don't have any issues with it clearing gearboxes and sumps because you can just do this. Right, so that's one assembled subframe ready to go back onto the van. It's a bit of a shame we never got to fit the new anti-roll bar, but thankfully this one did come up pretty well. There's not much rust on it. Yes, we don't have the adjustment like the white line one, but typically on the VAG stuff, the rears where you stiffen it up and the front you tend to leave standard in any case. I decided to give the engine a bit of a clean whilst everything was off, as it was quite badly caked in a mix of dirt and oil. And there's also been this constant leak at the front, which looks to be coming from the area on top of the gearbox. I have a feeling it's a vacuum pump, which is a common fault on the earlier 2.5s, but we'll look into this in the next episode once a few parts arrive. Threads in nice. So there's your movement before you tighten it down. I'm going to have it more on the outward setting. Right, slight issue with the dog bone. This front plate here, which is a separate piece, is just a bit too long. If you see the hole is there, that's kind of where we want it to be. Obviously, this is for like a Mark 6R and S38P, so maybe there's some differences because this is an MQ500 box. But what it does mean is we're going to have to put the original one back in, which I was hoping to save for the Passat, but I'll have to get another one. All that was left now was to fit the white line drop links. The length on these things are adjustable, and usually what I do is just compare them to the original ones to get a rough idea. In this case, they ended up being on their shortest setting. Now, I'm not going to lie, folks, this is originally where this episode was going to conclude, as I thought I've done a fair few items, but something just didn't sit right with me, and that's those rusty looking suspension struts and rear dampers. It kind of takes a shine off everything else, so I thought, no, let's bin them and expedite the coilover plans into this video. So here's what I've got: a set of lovely Bilstein B14s. This is the TÜV approved kit, and it was supplied by the guys at Darkside. They are height adjustable, but unlike the B16s, which aren't officially available for a Caddy, you can't adjust the damping on them. Also got a few refresh items as well, so new TT top mounts with the bearings, new pinch bolts, and also the ones for the drive shaft. Now, why those drive shaft bolts are a pretty interesting topic for me today is because the ones that are on this van are the tightest I've ever seen on anything. That's why I left the drive shafts in when I did the ball joints earlier and just cut the top bolt off. Now, the reason why I'm talking in past tense is because it's now loose, because I've bought a new bit of equipment, which I'm going to show you now. And here it is, a DeWalt DCF 900 impact wrench. I went and got this from Screwfix yesterday, so it's not a sponsored video, but believe me, this thing has changed my outlook on things. I've been using this for a couple of years now. It's did the job. It's just a random Amazon one. I thought I'd treat myself and get some nice bit of equipment because I've always made do with all the basic stuff you find. My main bulk of my tools is just Halfords Advance and whatever I can get on eBay. It's nothing fancy at all. But what I'll do is I'll show you in action on the driver's side because that one's still tight. Let me try my old one first again, see if it gets it on this side. Probably won't. Do you see what I mean? It just laughs at everything. After having too much fun with the new Impact, I thought I'd make a start on the coilovers. And yes, I'm undoing drop links and ball joints that we just put on. But such is project life. You change your mind daily on these sorts of things. Difference is now we can actually pull the drive shaft out. The process from here to remove the strut is quite simple. You've got the main pinch bolt, and then there's 3 top mount nuts to undo. Access to these is located behind this bulkhead trim. And for the driver's side, you will need to remove the wiper blades and motor just to make your life a bit easier. Just make sure you remove this lower windscreen plastic as well, and don't worry, it will clip back in. For the hubs, I recommend some form of spreader tool just to allow for the strut to move a bit more freely. And by the way, whilst all this is going down, make sure you got something propping everything up. Now you may be wondering, why am I whacking this strut with a hammer despite putting in this so-called spreader tool? Well, that's because I realized afterwards that they're junk on aluminium hubs. I had to order this fancy one for the driver's side as the previous bit just kept chewing into the hub every time I spun it around, and it wasn't even opening it up. Here it comes. Now, in regards to setting up the ride height on these, it's like a bunch of other coilovers. You've got a threaded shock body here, and you've got these 2 plates, and you tend to use a tool that looks like this. But unfortunately, I've got no way of determining how the lowest setting on these compares to what a TTR setup would be. Because this van was already pretty low, I don't fancy being any lower than that. Maybe you could go a touch higher even to make it a bit more drivable. But what I think I'm going to do is leave them exactly how they came. Thankfully, both of them are on the same thread. We can dial it in later when it's on the van because we're going to get this thing all set up and aligned because there's a bunch of things we've changed. And the coilovers came with this, so we're going to put it at the bottom of this OEM bearing, which goes like that. Then the TT top mount will go on top and basically sit like so. If we stand it up, you can see it all kind of makes sense. And if you put a bit of force on the top mount, some of the thread is reachable. We've got this nut which we need to put on. Top mount's attached, you can see it spins freely. There are some markers which I'll show you in a second. What I need to do is tighten this up. And for that, I'm just going to use the Impact. I know some of you purists will probably say you're meant to use one of them open-ended sockets, but most of the places I've been to have gone away with this. Right, so we've got the strut there relatively lined up. If I maneuver the shock slightly, you can see the threaded hole to the top. So you just need to put those 3 in. It is a bit tricky by yourself. And of course, we've got our favorite drive shaft bolt, an all new one to go in. That's pretty much all that's left. The rear dampers were predictably simple. There's an 80mm nut and bolt at the bottom and a 21mm bolt at the top. Breaker bar. Quick test. Fully compressed easily with one arm. Will it go back up with no force on it? Very, very slowly. So it's not actually doing what a shock should do. Look, it's still short. You can't really do it with one hand. Look at that. So there's your difference. Torrential downpour outside. No problem. As you can see, it needs to go up a fair bit. Let's see if I can get any tension off this. Right, so everything's all complete and looking very shiny. You can see the build stands from here. We've also got the rear dampers through that little gap. I've double checked everything and I've also put these cooling ducts back onto these arms. And yeah, pretty much all of these bolts have been replaced for new ones because they are a stretch item. The rear especially is looking a lot better now. We still obviously have got room for improvement, like sorting out this spare tire. This could probably do with a lick of paint. We'll maybe scrub it down to bare metal. And I've also just trimmed down these bump stops. It was a job that I was meant to do when fitting these lowering shackles in the previous video, but I wasn't too sure how much to go by. The general consensus is to take 2 threads off, so that's what I've done. It is a bit of a faff because they're so thick. But yeah, I think it's about time we get one of the RS3 wheels on and just see how this looks behind it. All right then, here we go. Yeah, that's much more like it. Getting moved over to in this spot was interesting, and that's because of the angle of the front wheels. That's towing in there. So you'd think, okay, maybe that one's pointing out that way. Nope, that's towing in as well. So it definitely needs an alignment, we could say. But in terms of the ride height, I'm quite pleased with the way it sits in. It's not overly low. Right, so I'll keep this outro nice and short. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you drop a like on it. As I said earlier as well, if you are new, make sure you are subscribed. I'm focusing more on quality rather than quantity now that we've got this unit, because I can really go into more detail and make each video into like an episode rather than just uploading for the sake of it. But yeah, also make sure you follow me on Instagram to keep up to date in the meantime. Next, we're going to be making a start on the lovely R36 with its very stiff bonnet and also its 3.6 litre VR6 spiderwebs gathering. It's been a while. But yeah, I'll stop talking now and I'll see you soon.